that in addition to the above concerns, there are additional problems around the ongoing legality of licensed aircraft maintenance engineers now certifying for maintenance they have been performing safely and legally for years, as well as their ability to actually release an aircraft back to service if a non-licensed person has provided an airworthiness declaration for a maintenance task. In my view, there are simply too many concerns around these regulations to allow them to stand. The amendments do not deliver clear and concise regulations. The amendments do not support the existing MOS policy and fundamentally alter both Australia's long-established safety philosophy and processes. The guidance material does not seem to accurately reflect the regulations. The regulations do not improve alignment with the CASR and ICAO standards, the stated object of Australia's aviation sector, and in fact move us further away, and that is not a good thing. The regulations do not strengthen safety outcomes and instead remove a critical layer of licensed oversight. The regulations increase costs for the industry through increased administrative requirements. The regulations do not reduce complexity in the regulatory environment and in fact seem to make it more complex. In short, these amendments do not meet CASR's functions under the Civil Aviation Act and are not an appropriate use of CASR's delegated legislation powers. They are bureaucratic, complex and ineffective. They reduce safety and increase cost. The amendments do not support our aviation industry and ought to be disallowed. However, I do want to acknowledge Mr Mark Skidmore, the relatively new Director of Aviation Safety at CASR, who has spent significant time with me and industry representatives to try and come to a satisfactory conclusion. I must say I'm incredibly impressed by Mr Skidmore, as I think is the entire industry. I think he has been a terrific appointment by this government. I think he's someone that has been welcomed in a bipartisan fashion and a cross-party fashion. So I look forward to working with him, and I understand that this is a legacy issue that Mr Skidmore has taken on, and I understand that he must rely on advice from senior members within his organisation, given this is something that he has inherited. So unfortunately a compromise has not been reached. As such, the best and most appropriate way to resolve these issues and to ensure Australia's high level of safety and maintenance is maintained is to disallow these regulations. We will then, in the case of disallowance, simply go back to what was in place, something that worked previously. There may be scope for compromise, there may be scope to improve the previous regulations, but these regulations are not the solution. As such, if they are disallowed, CASR can then address these concerns in redrafting and ensuring the best outcomes can be achieved. I trust our licensed aircraft engineers. I think it is important that we listen to them. Steve Purvinas does have a national reputation as being seen as a moderate union leader, someone who has been highly respected, someone who actually works constructively with the airlines that he works with, someone who takes safety incredibly seriously. There is a fundamental error that has been made here. I urge my colleagues on all sides of this chamber, for the sake of airline safety, to heed the advice of the licensed aircraft engineers, those who keep our aircraft in the best possible, in the safest possible condition, and also to listen to the very considered opinion of Brett Walker SC and to disallow these regulations.
Thank you, Senator Xenophon. Senator Cash.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. The government does not support this disallowance motion. The motion would wind back the clock on regulatory principles which have been in place since 2011. If successful, the disallowance motion would prevent important safety measures being incorporated into the Part 145 Manual of Standards, or the MOS, and impose additional regulatory burdens on Australia's approved maintenance organisations without any demonstrated improvements in aviation safety. It cannot be supported without setting back the process of modernising Australia's aviation safety maintenance regulations introduced by the previous government and supported by this government. The Civil Aviation Safety Authority, or CASR as it is known, has, after extensive consultation with both industry and the unions, developed this MOS amendment to implement important safety and oversight measures on approved maintenance organisations, whilst at the same time adding 4 extra tasks to the list allowed to be performed by specialist maintenance personnel. The concept of specialist maintenance has been in place in the Australian Civil Aviation Safety Regulations since 2011. It is acknowledged that the union representing licensed aircraft maintenance engineers, the Australian Licensed Aircraft Engineers Association, is opposed to the use of specialist maintainers. I am advised that the Australian Licensed Aircraft Engineers Association does not want the list of specialist maintenance activities expanded to include on-wing engine maintenance or inferior furnishing roles such as carpet laying. I am also advised that the Australian Licensed Aircraft Engineers Association argues that the continued monopoly provision by licensed aircraft maintenance engineers for maintenance certifications for all aircraft maintenance is the only safe situation, and that outcome should continue. However, the position CASR has taken is consistent with International Civil Aviation Organisation standards and recommended practices. CASR's position is also consistent with that which is being applied by overseas aircraft maintenance organisations in other major aviation jurisdictions such as Europe, the United States, Canada and New Zealand. That position is that an approved maintenance organisation is responsible for providing the safe outcome on the maintenance of an aircraft. This concept is included in the Part 145 Manual of Standards amendments, which are the subject of Senator Xenophon's disallowance motion. While the government appreciates that Senator Xenophon's motion was put forward with good intentions, and we certainly acknowledge Senator Xenophon's long-standing interest in aviation policy matters, the government will not be supporting the disallowance motion and urges other senators to also not support the disallowance motion.
Thank you, Senator Cash. Senator Conroy.
Madam Acting Deputy President, Labor will support this disallowance. Labor's position is that air safety is a paramount consideration in regulation and management of air operations, including maintenance. We appreciate the hard work undertaken by CASR in overseeing safety in civil aviation. Australia retains one of the safest air safety regimes in the world. Generally, Labor believes that CASR regulations should be allowed by the Parliament. The issues surrounding this regulation are highly complex and technical. This includes concerns about matching with international standards set by the International Civil Aviation Organisation, legislation, regulations and guidance. As we understand the issue, this regulation adds to the list of specialist maintenance tasks in a way that potentially conflicts with ICAO standards and potentially removes a level of checking on maintenance that forms part of a safety regime. We are concerned that the system of checks and chain of qualification is at least confused by the regulatory change. Where there is a legitimate question raised about safety concerns, Labor favours a precautionary approach. Labor believes that a clearly understood system of checks and cross-checks is an important element of good safety practice, and that this regime should be clearly delineated and understood by all involved in the system. It is clear to us that, indeed, if the system is clear to CASR, it is not well appreciated or understood by those at the coalface. There are concerns about the legal effect of this change, as expressed in a legal opinion from Brett Walker QC. We note that this regulation has been in place since October 2014. Since that time, a new CEO has been appointed to CASR. The opposition has had the opportunity to meet Mr Skidmore, the new Director of Air Safety, and we acknowledge his new approach, centred on 5 key principles, including on safety, clear communication, reducing complexity, measuring regulatory impact and consistency. At this point, the opposition believes that there are sufficient questions around the regulation of safety arising from this regulation to urge the parties to reconvene and clearly articulate a safety framework around these changes. The Parliament needs to be assured that safety standards remain, and at least some are arguing this is not the case. The opposition has taken considerable time and a number of meetings to listen closely to CASR's rationale and the views of the workers at the coalface in the industry. Through that process, it is clear that the benefits to industry from these changes are on the low side, though uncosted at this point. Further, the consequences of disallowing are not characterised as major by CASR, and for these reasons, Labor favours a precautionary approach on this occasion.
Thank you, Senator